Hello and welcome to On Deadline. I'm Dennis Owens.
I'm Kendra Nichols.
And I'm Amanda St. Hilaire. Thanks for joining us.
If you're listening for the first time, we are journalists for ABC27 News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
But on this podcast, we talk about issues that affect people all over.
These are the conversations you don't hear on the news. We're different generations with different perspectives, so we don't always agree.
And we're different. Yeah, you just said that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I took your line.
That's all right.
Just kidding.
We do get very personal, get very real, and hopefully get you thinking.
We're recording on December 4th, 2017, and today we're discussing redistricting. Pennsylvania's been called one of the most gerrymandered states in the union. There are court cases to redraw the current political boundaries. What does that mean? Why should you care? Is it really a problem? To help us break it down and answer those questions, we have two guests today. Jean Handley with Fair Districts PA. Hello.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Chris Nichols with Eagle Consulting. Now, he's a GOP political advisor who worked for many years for Senator Arlen Specter and many others. He really understands the political process. How are you, Chris?
I'm fine, Dennis. Looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for being with us. And later, I'm looking forward to this as well, we're going to talk about a story that's getting a lot of response. Amanda reported on Camp Hill and West Shore police departments that seem to be favoring one specific towing company when there's an accident in their municipalities, meaning citizens involved in a mishap who are supposed to be able to choose their towing company really aren't getting that choice, and it is costing them. We're going to get into that a little bit later, and we'll also have a word from you, the comments that you've sent to us. But first, redistricting reform. Every 10 years, a census is taken, and political boundaries are redrawn to represent those population shifts for your congressional delegation and also your state representatives and your state senators. So, Jean, let's begin with you. Explain to me how the redistricting process works and, most significantly, why the average person should care.
Well, briefly, there are actually two redistricting processes, one for the congressional redistricting and one for the state redistricting, and it can get a little confusing. But the congressional redistricting is done through a legislative bill. A bill is introduced into the legislature, the Senate, and the House in Pennsylvania vote on it, goes to the governor signs it, it becomes the new districts.
So it has to go through the legislative process.
It does, and it can be challenged in court as it is being, as we speak. But that's the congressional process. In the state legislative process, it's a little different. It is a 5-member commission. It is made
4 caucuses.
Yeah, the House majority and the Senate majority leader or their designee, and the minority leaders in the House and the Senate for Pennsylvania or their designee. And then they're supposed to pick a fifth person. Difficult to do, and you might be able to see what the problem is in that.
And if they can't agree, then the state Supreme Court should.
Exactly.
Yeah? And I think that's happened. I've covered the last 2. That's happened on at least the last 2.
Yeah. So it's 2 different processes, and both of them can be challenged in court, but they are, the 2 separate processes.
So what's the significance of this? Because sometimes when we talk about this, people's eyes glaze over. They think we're getting too deep into the weeds.
Well, the significance is that, and you've probably heard this before, legislators picking their voters as opposed to voters picking their legislators. I mean, it's an easy phrase to say, but that's basically what the concern is. The way that things are gerrymandered now, and they can draw their districts.
And just for perspective, gerrymandering. So this is not a new problem. Gerrymander is a word. Was a salamander. Was a district in Massachusetts in 1812. Eldridge Gerry. He drew a district that looked like a salamander. They called it a gerrymander, and so it's been something people have been fighting over forever.
Yeah, we've had it at least since 1812. That's when the word was coined. It probably goes back further than that, but because of the technology and because of the data and the ability to data mine now, it has become basically extremely sophisticated and very, very specific.
So I'm holding up for our viewers, but anybody can call it up on the computer, basically the congressional districts that we have in Pennsylvania that are in effect right now.
And if you're listening, we're going to post this on our show notes, right? Because you're used to saying viewers, Dennis.
On our show notes, it's exactly right. And listeners, I'm still learning this whole podcast thing. But there's a couple that come to mind. Is the 7th, which has been called Donald kicking Goofy or Goofy kicking Donald, depending on your favorite Disney characters. You look at the 11th, which is Lou Barletta, which goes from almost New York to almost Maryland, almost Maryland in a line. Many of these are held together by one building. There's some districts that stay in. It's one building, literally, that the line runs through.
Congressional districts, Dennis, held together by one building.
Well, there's Creed's Seafood House down there by King of Prussia, and then there's the Brandywine gastrointestinal
Right.
clinic.
Yes, that's what. Correct.
In the South,
At least
yeah.
Probably never thought they'd be referred to in this kind of conversation.
Right. There's been some reporting on that, but Chris, let me bring you in for just a moment. Tell me, you're typically, I call you a "there's nothing to see here" kind of guy when it comes to this. That many people have looked at this map, and in fact,
Political districts drawn by politicians for political reasons are
political.
You've heard me say that on TV.
I have.
So let me give you some background. In the 0 year we do the census.
Yep.
Ironically, it's April 1st of the 0 year.
So the next one will be April 1st in 2020.
The 1 year is when the legislature, they get the information late in the 0 year, early in the 1 year, and then they know what the population is. These are all based on populations,
yes,
not on voters. And then throughout the 1 year, they redraw the districts. Pennsylvania will lose another congressional district in the next census because our proportion of the country's population is shrinking. So in 1900, we had 36 congressional districts. Come 2022, when the new districts come online, we'll have 17. So this map will be reorganized again. Districts will geographically get bigger because now you're slicing the state into 17 pieces, not 18. On the state level, because you're always going to have, until maybe the laws change, 50 state senators and 203 state reps. It's what I call political chiropractic, where you adjust for population shifts in the state. And essentially, to boil it down, the Philadelphia suburb, Lehigh Valley, central Pennsylvania triangle is the growing part of the state. You add sometimes part of the Poconos and State College area, you pump a couple $2 billion into a little town every year for 3 generations and it grows. Everything else in Pennsylvania is losing population. So what we're seeing is districts move to the east where the people are. And one of the ways you can tell that is you can look at a county like Bucks County, and all of its numbers were put together in the 140s. And then you see an 18th district stuck in there. That came out of Pittsburgh. You see a 170-something district. That one came out of Philadelphia, because those places are losing in population, and Bucks County is growing. So these districts are always changing. To just rebut something that our other guest said, Joanne, the congressional map that we're all looking at now, when we're all so askance about 6 or 7 years after the fact, was supported by a large plurality of Democrats. One of the leading Democratic congressmen in the state, Bob Brady, not only voted for it, but whipped votes for it. Okay, so that passed.
And somebody could argue that's because he liked the way his thing was drawn.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's a part of it. And on the state level, there are 5 people, as Joanne pointed out. And the vote to approve the new state level maps was not 3-2, it was 4-1. So the House Democratic leader voted for the map, okay? And that's just the facts.
Right, but for people that are on the outside, they can say a pox on all their house. They're just hey, if you give me a good district, I'm going to say yeah, but that doesn't make it a good district for the average voter.
Self-interest isn't partisan.
Well, I want to know, are there any rules written in stone when you revisit this however many 10 years and you say, are the rules written in stone that each district has to have this? Do you try to make it even with each population?
Well, number of people.
I understand,
it's two different sets of rules, Kendra. So on the federal level, one man, one vote out of the 60s. That is the law of the land. There are other things. They want them to be compact and contiguous, but they have to have equal population. So the congressional districts in 2001, the bill was actually signed by Governor Schweiker because Governor Ridge had moved on to the Office of Homeland Security at that point. So that map came out, and the 19 districts at that point in 2001 had a population variance of 17 people. And some Democrats took it to court, federal court, successfully and challenged it and said, these districts do not pass constitutional muster because one district has 17 more people than the other. And the court said, We agree. So redraw them. So then the districts were redrawn in 2001 to have a population variance of one. And that's what these districts do now. So the numbers they got in the 0 year in April 1st. So that's why we unfortunately have some places like in Mechanicsburg where precincts are split. Precincts are supposed to be the smallest unit. And to get that population variance down, they have to sometimes in a particular precinct say everybody in the 4,000 block of Maple Street is in this district. People in the 5,000 block of Maple Street or another, even though you vote at the same church down the street. And then when you walk in, you have one set of machines that say 5th Congressional District, and another set that say, 11th or whatever the case may be.
I just wanted to make it clear there are rules that have to be followed, but the question is, how are they being followed?
The rules on the state level are a little bit more loosey-goosey. Excuse me, John.
To a degree on that. When you're saying one, it's not one person. I think it's 1%, isn't it, Chris?
It's one person.
Because it's
Joanne.
like 711,000, I think, is roughly the number now. But for the congressional districts, and as far as I know, the congressional, the Constitution does not really say anything about compact and contiguous. That is left to the states. But our state Constitution does say that the state districts for the House and the Senate have to be compact and contiguous, and they, unless absolutely necessary, cannot divide counties, townships, boroughs, municipalities, etc.
To correct you, Gene, I'm sorry, I referred to you as Joanne. I apologize. It is Gene. The law of the land for congressional districts is not 1%. It's one person. So when these districts came online in a couple of years ago, 2011, 12 or 13 of them had the same population. The other 5 or 6 had one person more. And they knew they had to do that because they knew in 2001, as I just referenced, 17 was too many.
So, but Gene, give me the answer of why the average voter should care about that. What is the, we're talking line drawing here at this point, but why should the average voter and average person care? How does it affect them?
Well, the average, as far as the voters being concerned about this, it affects you even on a local level. Let me give you an example. Susquehanna Township is here in the Harrisburg area is divided into 2 different congressional districts, the 11th and the 4th. When it was one congressional district, there's an intersection that probably you're all aware of, down at Progress Avenue and Walnut Street, very, very dangerous intersection. And at that point, when Tim Holden, I believe, was in office, he had tried to get some funding to change that intersection. And Susquehanna Township spent a lot of money to get that study done. Lo and behold, the districts are redrawn. Tim Holden is no longer there. We now have 2 people. Because they only have a small piece, each one of them, they really don't care about Susquehanna Township. All of that just dried up, went away, nothing has been done, same intersection. There's other examples of that. But the point is that if you are in a district that is split and many people are, you have concerns, it's difficult to get your concerns addressed.
I would say just the opposite. And by the way, the Susquehanna split, I think, is about 90% in one district and 10% in the other. I'm sure neither congressman would agree with Gene that they don't care about Susquehanna Township.
Now Susquehanna Township don't care. I think
she just said it 5 seconds ago. She said they don't care about it.
No, it's that you can have a representative who doesn't have to care about your geography. So I live in Cumberland County. You can totally write off my neighborhood and my area.
In the state, by the way.
And I'm not saying my representative does that, but I'm saying it is possible to do that and still win the rest of the district. I feel like that was at least that's what I heard, and those are the concerns that I've heard raised.
I've never worked for a member of Congress or a senator in an official capacity. I've always been a campaign hack. But I have never met anyone in either party that didn't care about their constituents. Now, politically, they may not have to worry about one neighborhood as much as the other, but in terms of dealing with their constituent issues, I've never heard somebody say, I only have 90% of Susquehanna Township, so screw those people. I just,
There are instances where people have had concerns, though, and I have talked to a lot of these people, and they have tried to talk to their senator or their congressman or their representative about issues, and they can't even get a meeting about certain things. Well, not no, not at all, because there's not a lot of lines sitting down there. But as far as caring about the issue, I think that people look at this, and not only are they concerned about the political process of what we're seeing and the confidence in everything, they're saying, we just don't feel like we're being represented fairly. Not that you're going to take politics out of this at all. I mean, there's always going to be some politics in it. However, if you have a more transparent process, you have a more impartial process, and a more accountable process. Chris said it himself that really there is not, I think you said it, I'm sorry if I misquoted, but I think that it's not a very transparent process. There's just not a lot of public hearings or anything going on with this stuff.
What would a better process look like, though? Because as we talked about earlier, it's always going to be political. You're never going to take politics completely out of it.
I think you could take these numbers to a kindergarten class and let them draw squares, and sometimes it would turn out to be a better situation than what we're looking at.
I think
they're actually doing that
on the
now.
Fair District side do have what I call shape dysphoria. They just don't like the fact that there are little squares. You can't get to that with the rules saying you have to be one person. Secondly, here is the number of people who lost their legislative seats because they voted for these redistricting plans. I'm making a zero sign.
Zero.
So people are held accountable. When you have these voted on by your state reps, they're up for election every 2 years, senators every 4 years. You can go to them and say, I don't like the fact that you drew this in the district, I'm not going to vote for you.
But
I'm
if
sure
they
people
drew you
did that.
out of their district because they don't like the way you're going to vote, can you really hold them accountable? Being if we do have a situation in
Everybody
which
lives in a district, Amanda,
right?
So you can vote for or against somebody.
But if lawmaker A, if I'm drawn out of lawmaker A's district and I am now in lawmaker B's district, lawmaker A isn't as accountable to me as he or she would have been before. So if you're picking your constituents, can they really vote you out later after the fact? And maybe they can, but how is the fact that that's not happening because people don't care? Or is it because it is now becoming harder for them to do so, is my question.
Let me try to address something with that, Amanda. If you look at the 2016 elections, and just look at the state elections, I think it was 91.7% of the people that ran for the House and the Senate were incumbents, okay? And if you take it to the next step and look at challengers in the primaries, out of that 91.7% that ran as incumbents, I think it was 86.1% were unchallenged. Now, they were either unchallenged because people loved them so much that they figured, okay, we don't need somebody here to challenge us. Or they have people that don't feel that they can challenge them because they're not going to win anyway.
A little bit less than half of state legislators up for re-election were not challenged. It was not 86%.
No, it was, and I can get the figures for you, but they ran unchallenged. And then if you go to the general election,
Gene, you're saying 175 members of the House had no opponent. That's just not right.
Yeah, I could pull the figures out.
Opponents in primaries?
Primaries.
The incumbent, she was saying in a primary.
I'm talking about
a little bit less than half didn't have any challengers at all.
Right, but in the primaries or in the general election?
None.
In the
if you have
primaries.
no primary challenger, you're not going to have a general challenger.
Well, let me see. Now, there was.
Wait a minute. No, if I'm a Republican incumbent and I don't have a primary challenger, I could still have an opponent in the fall
Yes,
as
you
a
can have an
Democrat.
opponent in
A
the
little
fall.
bit less than half had zero opponents. Zero, meaning whether the spring or the fall. So a little bit less than half had zero opponents.
I
Okay,
would
now,
beg to differ with you on that.
do you know
but
how many districts there are in the state that have more registered independents than Republicans? There's 19 state house districts, almost 10%. have more registered independents than Republicans. So it's hard sometimes to find a Republican to run that district because you'd have to get almost everybody in the district to sign your petition.
Let me just
Okay?
finish where I was going with that, though. We can argue about it, and I can pull them out, but then you go to the general election. So if you've had people that have run challenged in the primary, and then you go to the general election, I think it was 48.7% ran unopposed in the general election. So if you take that to the conclusion, you have people that are running unopposed in the primary, so they and then they run opposed in the general election. Well, you've basically won your election in the primary. Well, then you
Which
get to the
happens
general,
frequently in
and
Cumberland County.
you don't have any independent voices. You don't have any of the other party voices. And I'm not talking. This is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. Understand that this is an issue that affects us all. The Republican leadership does not want this change. The Democratic leadership doesn't want this change because they like the way that it
My question is how much of this is because we have a two-party system and because of apathetic voters, and how much of it is because of redistricting? And I don't know that we can split that up or separate the two.
Well, I think you've got a good point. I think there are a lot of things in play. But the point being that if you can make it a more impartial, a more accountable, a more observable public input process, I think that you're going to come up with a better system that's going to take away some of the influence that the leaders of both parties have over their legislators.
Well, let me ask you one question.
No incumbent legislator at any level has ever walked into their leader's office and said, please make my district more competitive. I want to spend more time away from home campaigning and raising money and less time with my family and legislating. That has never happened. So the goal of redistricting in each party is to make their current members, who they are accountable to, safer.
So to go
and
back,
what has happened, and look, I'm a consultant. I want more competitive districts because then more people would have to hire me. But the facts of life is that no one walks in and says, please make my district more competitive. They say the opposite. And because like-minded people live next to each other, it's a concept called the clustering of America, which came out in the mid-1980s in a book of the same name. That's what you tend to have like-minded people cluster together. So it's sometimes hard when you draw these districts. Dennis, think about this. A state house district is less than 0.5% of the state. Okay? So, 62, 63, 65,000 people, that's a pretty small slice of a state of 12.7 million people. But I'm sorry, you're going to ask us a question.
I was going to ask a question of, and let me ask you too, Gene. So in Congress, where we will all agree there's terrible gridlock for the most part, things aren't getting done. What incentive, when you have districts drawn like this, let's take Scott Perry, for instance, what incentive does he ever have to reach across the aisle? In fact, the way his district is drawn, he can't even admit to spelling Democrat, let alone working with one, as opposed to he's got to be more concerned about somebody from the right. The way his district is drawn, getting a challenge there. So what is when districts get drawn this way? Because I want to jump to what the real impact
You're talking
is
about polarization
in Washington D.C. That's what I'm talking about.
Dennis, Scott Perry's 4th district,
and I like Scott. I was just pulling him out.
Was not drawn to be a Republican district. It just is. There's no way to draw a district, Adams and York County, and something else, and not have it be overwhelmingly Republican. Just like in Philly and Pittsburgh, you're not going to draw a district that's competitive just because the people that live there.
But
if Democrats were drawing it, let me just interrupt for a minute. If Democrats were drawing that because they basically enveloped Harrisburg, which used to be Tim Holden's seat, which used to be a little more Democratic with some of Susquehanna Township, they've just made sure it was big enough Republican and then just scoop up Harrisburg. So Harrisburg basically it's a Democratic city. It's not really represented in Congress.
They cracked it, yeah.
So
it's called cracking and packing is what
you're
call
saying is that a district, a portion of a district can't be representative if its registration is different than the person that represents. Is that what you're saying, Dennis?
That's not what I'm saying.
That's exactly what you said.
No.
You said Harrisburg isn't represented.
Let's go back to what you started with, and that is
because it has a Republican.
It's a political system drawn by politicians. So we'll start there. You said, what else can you do tell them what else we can do.
Everything around Harrisburg, Dennis, is more Republican than Harrisburg. So however you draw that district, Harrisburg, because of its location, is going to be the Democratic hole in a Republican donut.
Correct.
Okay?
Which is
that's just
fine.
where people live.
But if like-minded people cluster together, why are there people who live near New York in my district? If the idea is if people gather together in those places where they think alike, why do we have these squiggly lines all up across the state if the idea is just this is where people are?
So you just want squares, Amanda? Is that
No,
what you want?
I'm asking if like-minded people live together, why is there such a stretch with these districts?
The 11th district is primarily white, okay? Whether you're in the top or the bottom, okay? It's right of center, whether you're at the top or the bottom, and those are the people that live there. So what you're saying is people should only be represented with their people around them, and then you run into the realities of
who said
you have
like-minded
said
people live
like-minded.
together.
They do,
So I'm
but when
asking
you have to
about
put
that.
707,000 people into a district and have it be population variance of 1, you sometimes can't do
So
all
that's
that
the
sort
only
of
way
stuff.
to do it, is the way it's
not the
currently
only
drawn.
way to do it. You could do it. I drew my own map in 2011 because I figured I can't be involved in this process and criticizing it if I'm not drawing my own
You may
map.
be the only. Well, no, there's a woman,
Yeah,
Amanda,
now-
somewhere.
I didn't have all the population information they have. And my map was different because I kept the 17th district Holden around here, and the 11th district, Barletta's, was more of a NEPA, Northeast PA district. And that's fine, but this is fine too.
Why do you think that's fine?
No, tell me why it isn't fine.
No, you tell me why
You're
you
really
think it
good
is
at
fine.
dodging questions.
I'm not dodging. I mean,
dodging.
we live in a state that's 45,500 square miles big, Amanda, okay? You can't always have a district that's this big because there aren't enough people there.
And I don't think that that's necessarily what they're saying.
The Holden district used to be an hour and a half across, and now this one's 2 hours and change. I mean, as I said, we're going to lose districts. So get ready for this. Our districts next time, because the state's only going to be divided into 17 slices, the districts will physically, not all of them, but most of them, will physically get bigger. Okay? Montana is a state that only has 1 district, so the whole state's a district. Now, they're likely to pick up a seat because Rhode Island's going to lose a seat. So what probably happens in 2021 is Rhode Island goes back to being a onesie and Montana gets a twosie. Okay? Now, I don't know what's harder, dividing a state into 17 or what Montana's going to have to do and divide a state in half. Do you draw the line vertically, horizontally? I mean, I don't know.
Right. The actual redistricting process, because we say redistricting and people think that has a bad connotation, but it has to happen, and it does happen in order to account for population shifts and in order to account for changes. Is the way that it's happening now the best possible way to do it, or is there room for improvement?
People want to have a citizen commission.
Yes.
So right now, people elect representatives who are accountable, and they draw the maps. Now what these folks want, and correct me if I'm wrong, they want to elect people who have accountability, who then will appoint people who have no accountability. Okay? A citizens commission is going to come together for 6-9 months, and then it goes away. They are
And probably end up just as political.
and they
Right. That's
how
not
can you
good.
hold accountable people appointed to something that goes away? If you don't like what a state rep or state senator did, regardless of what district you live in, you can organize people to go unelect that state senator or that state rep. What are you going to do when a citizens commission screws up? You're going to go knock on somebody's door? Excuse me, madam, the group you used
So
to
you don't
belong
like
to.
a citizens commission, but do you like the way we do it now, or is there
Here's
any
the
tweaks
change
you would
I
make in a
Here's the change I
perfect
would
world?
make if someone made me dictator, okay? is I would say you can't take into account, an incumbent's place of residence when you do the districts. Okay? So draw the districts that make sense. And if that person doesn't happen to live in that district, fine, they can run in another district. Because what happens is you get an incumbent in the district, and then the district shifts. That's what happened to the 7th district and the 16th. And then you have to stretch. So when I was drawing my own maps, the problem with one of the reasons the 7th district, goofy, kicking whoever, is that the state rep in the neighboring district, the 16th, Joe Pitts, had run in 1996 and said he was going to serve for 10 years. Oops, he really meant 10 terms. Okay? So that part of the world, Lancaster County and Chester, had grown, so the district had to get physically smaller, and I'm just going to point here to you for this. So what happened is Joe Pitts, to keep him in the district, he lives all the way here, okay? All the way over to there. Now, when
and
I was
just for people listening, when you say over to there,
he lived in the farthest eastern part of the district. Now, 20 years ago, when he was there, that district made more sense the way it looked. And what happened is a lot of people moved into that part of the world. So when I was drawing my own map, the Chris Nicholas Eagle Consulting Group map, I said, don't put him in his district. A, he should have retired already because he was way past his term limits pledge. And B, if he ran again anyway, he still would have won. So that's why this is so convoluted. So that instance is now gone. So when they redo the map out here, this part of the 7th won't be as goofy looking, no pun intended, because they won't have to figure that, because the new incumbent for the 16th lives outside Lancaster, which is kind of the geographic center. Former State Senator Smucker, who's now Congressman Smucker. And the unwritten story is how competitive that district has become because of, A, the Democrats, unlike most places, running a good candidate, and B, the demographics changing. So on the congressional level, at least, I want to get in my line. I think Democrats are trying to weaponize their campaign ineptitude by all of these court cases. These districts came online in 2011. We had no court challenges in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and I think most of 2016. So what happens is Obama leaves office. He realizes he's torched and burned the Democratic Party underneath him. He raises a bunch of money and says, I'm going to make it up, clear my conscience, by funding all of these challenges to redistricting, which is fine. They're allowed to do that. That's perfectly legal. But the reason the Democrats don't like the maps is not because of how they look, but because of the results.
Well, because when they're in charge, they're able to draw it to benefit them, and that's when
Maryland
the Republicans get upset about it.
Maryland did that, and Democrats.
Illinois
So,
the same way.
What do you think
In
about all
California,
this? And
yeah.
specifically, what do you think about the idea of, okay, fine, we'll keep the process largely the same, except that you don't have to live in your district now that we're redrawing?
That's a really good question.
Well,
You
but
just
have to
I
run
mean,
it
while
on a
it's
state
being
level.
correct.
Not on the federal level. You just have to live in the state. I'm sorry, Gene.
Well, no, I humbly have to disagree with you, Chris, on pretty much everything that you have said. First of all, I go back to, this is not a Democratic or Republican issue, whether you feel that it is or whatever. This is an issue that I don't care whether you're an independent, you don't vote. I mean, this stuff affects you, and so you can argue that the Democrats are fighting this. Fair district is not Democrat, Republican, or whatever. I mean, it is.
But
it is
the
a totally
timing is suspect.
Okay, so you're talking about the court cases, or are you talking about?
Well, there's a couple of court cases, both a federal one and a state one.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about the court
And
cases,
we're
let me just
we're
talk.
already 6 years into using these maps.
Why they are doing that, and that has nothing to do with what Fair Districts is looking at. I mean, it's the League of Women Voters in one of the court cases, which is down here in Commonwealth Court, and then there's the Agre versus Wolf case, which is in federal court starting today down in Philadelphia. Why they're bringing the court cases? Very possibly, maybe they're trying to push an issue and get something done for 2018. But that is not what we are looking at. We're not looking at the past. We're looking at the system needs to be changed, the way that they go about redistricting process totally. It doesn't need to be two different processes, one for the Congress and one for the Senate and the House. It needs to be all one process. And we feel, and maybe this isn't the only way to go, but we feel that an independent citizens commission, and you say it's not accountable, well, if you want to talk about the people that are doing it now, they're not accountable either, because it goes back
They're
to your
public
question.
officials, of
But
course
wait,
they're accountable.
Chris. It goes back to what you said. If you can't vote these people out, then how can they be accountable? If they are in such a safe district that you cannot get them out because you don't like what they do, they are not accountable. And who draws the lines? If you really want to get down to who drew the lines in the 2011 redistricting for the Congress, they were drawn in Washington. Okay, it was not done necessarily here in Harrisburg. It was done with the Republican Redistricting Commission, and so they had the input there. So if you're talking about people being accountable up here and being able to change the process, no, that's not the case. If you make a citizens commission that is, they are incredibly strict application requirements for this.
How do you know we've never done it before?
Say again, Chris?
How do you know the application requirements are strict? We've never done this before.
Well, if
You'd
you
have to
list
trust
them,
the people that you don't trust now to make the application requirements for
no,
the Citizens
no,
Commission.
Chris, understand
right?
that the application requirements are put into the SB 22 and HB 722. Yeah, there are some in there, but there is a clause in there that also says the General Assembly will, and I can't quote it verbatim, but it will determine what the requirements are for
And
these
there are
commissioners.
some states that have citizens groups that.
There are.
that
Now,
draw up
California happens to be the only one that is a totally independent citizens commission, but there are citizens commissions in a number of states. I think there's 30-some.
Just for the record, I am against citizens commissions for this. I am against citizens commissions for appointing statewide judges. Okay, I am against.
I told you, you're the
backroom-
nothing to see here guy. You
No.
You prefer, because I saw the last one, and it's done behind closed doors and very much in
You
secret.
do have an accountability issue, because at least in theory with an elected leader, you can vote them out. And if you have, like you said, the people you don't trust making the rules and appointing people anyway, then isn't the process just as political? And haven't we gone and reshaped everything to
I don't know,
have
if you have the League of Women Voters and Common Cause PA and a couple of other groups that are heavily involved in that, you don't think they do a better job than political people who have
I don't know.
a vested interest?
Those aren't the necessary people.
Those are all very, very
these are people.
democratic groups, by the way.
I would beg to differ, but anyway, once
Just
you-
look at them, okay? I mean, it's fine that they're primarily
Okay.
Democratic,
Then
but I'm just going to
look
point
at
that out.
these. You
This
know,
is fun.
I mean, just look at these. If it doesn't necessarily pass the
Now,
eyeball test.
the
But
governor who signed the current redistricting law for the Congress into law, Tom Corbett, right?
Yep.
He signed that 2011. He lost in 2014. How many people think he lost because he signed the bill for that map? Total is zero.
Zero.
Okay.
And
so
nobody is going to say,
we're all
I'm not
chasing our
re-electing my
tail
state
here.
rep because I didn't like the congressional map. I mean,
That's
so-
what
that-
the fair districts
But
people
that goes
are
back
saying.
to my original question. How much of this, when we talk about people running unchallenged, when we talk about the results that people say are negative when it comes to redistricting, how much of it is because of actual redistricting, and how much of it is because of general voter apathy,
Or being pissed off.
or that?
Okay? And this is the reason du jour to be pissed off because of this. And 2 years ago it was something else, and 2 years it'll be something else, and that's fine. Okay, I think people are chasing their tails here to think that having elected officials appoint people who are unaccountable to draw the lines is going to totally change things. Okay, the districts still have to meet the same requirements. And the other thing that people haven't talked about here is that in 2012, our state redistricting process got blown up by the state Supreme Court. The
sent 'em
commission
back to the drawing
the
board.
commission passed it 4-1, and then it went back. So what happened in 2012? The state had to run their state districts for state house and state senate
The old maps.
on the districts that were drawn in 2001. No one seemed upset about that. That was a huge gift to the Democratic Party because those districts favored them. And then we came back in 14, and guess what? All the districts they moved, the Republicans won all but one of them anyway. Okay, so at the end of the day, what it comes down to is how well do you run campaigns. In Pennsylvania right now, we have 18 congressional districts. Okay, 3 Republicans hold seats in Congress that have more registered Democrats than Republicans. So when Democrats come and cry to me about the maps, I'm like, hey, go win those 3 districts, the 15th, the 18th, and the 12th. And then come back to me and complain about it. You can't even win districts where you have more of your own people than the others, okay? And that's not because of how the lines are drawn. That's because, and this is my opinion, Democrats do better at winning party endorsements and primaries because that's how their power centers, the cities, are put together. So when it comes to having to actually run campaigns, they're not built that way. Republicans don't have any place in the state where they have this overwhelming majority so they can win it through the backroom deals. They have to win elections. Okay, the most Democratic state rep district, I like to use these because there's 203 of them. The most Democratic state rep district by registrations in Philadelphia, 91% Democrat. The most Republican state house district, no surprises, in Lancaster County, 64% Republican. Okay, so the biggest plurality we have, majority is 64, they have 91. That's not bad or good, it's just where people live. Okay, so at the end of the day, Democrats, I believe, have not run very good campaigns. Okay, they can't get a majority in the House, they can't get a majority in the state Senate, they can't get even close to parity in Congress.
Let me tell you
and
where
now
they
what
have
they're
a majority.
saying is, hey, this is why the districts are bad. I'm like, no, you have it reversed.
Let me tell you where they have a majority now, and it's significant, and that's big in the Supreme Court. And how's that going to change the game? And doesn't that make
it's 5-2 in the Supreme Court?
Correct. So the Supreme Court's Democrat, and it's going to be for a long time. Now does
the
that
other
change?
Two courts are Republican. It doesn't really matter. And this, I'm sorry.
Well, it doesn't in terms of redistricting. The Supreme Court is what matters. But how does that change? So I was thinking, the Republicans had the whole thing controlled, so there was no incentive for them to want to do any change, right? What's the incentive now for somebody to say?
So right now, the Republicans have the House and the Senate. The Democrats have the governorship, and they also have the edge on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we have another set of legislative elections in 18 and 20 before we get to redistricting. And then, of course, the gubernatorial election in 18 will change things, too. So it's a little bit too soon to say what the legislature and the governor will be, but you are correct, Dennis, in saying the court's going to be majority Democrat for the foreseeable.
So where
I think that's something Gene and I agree on.
Well, isn't
so
maybe the only thing.
Go home and
would there might not be now incentive for both sides to want to change the way it's done because neither side right now dominates it?
I agree with that. I mean, personally, you brought up.
You don't agree, or you
do?
do?
I do agree, Dennis, because you're looking at from the Republicans' standpoint. If the Supreme Court is going to be Democratic, potentially they're going to pick the 5th person for the state districts. If the governor, and who knows, if the governor is going to be Democratic, they will have the veto power over the congressional. Plus, there's another thing in there, HB 153, which is a bill that passed the legislative session one time. It has to go one more time. I don't know where it is exactly right now other than sitting in the committee, but it is one that is trying to make the the representative districts in Pennsylvania, instead of 203, it'd be 151, I believe it is. If that gets done, do the Republicans want the Democrats in charge of the redistricting process when they take away 51
You're talking about
or 50,
downsizing the legislature.
Downsizing the legislature.
That's
so I mean
a whole
that
other round of redistricting.
Well,
because now you'd have to slice the state.
Yeah,
into
you'd have to slice it
151.
down. Instead of 203 districts, you go down to 150. Now, do the Republicans want that being done by the Democrats? I don't think it should be done by either one of them. But
I think that's one of those bills that everybody likes to be a co-sponsor of, but never wants to come to a vote.
But it has gone through
Correct.
once.
But anyway,
don't exist.
Yeah. Sorry, Dennis. I didn't
That's
mean to
okay,
get.
but just last 2 seconds for each of you. So does that
I could
change?
go on here for an
Yeah.
hour.
Does that change the paradigm? The fact that now there seems to be at least some democratic power in the decision-making process.
If you're a Republican, your maps got blown up a couple of years ago by a Republican-led Supreme Court, by a Republican Supreme Court Chief Justice, and you survived. So I don't know why the Democrats controlling it now would be any different, because it got blown up before by your own people.
Blown up bad or blown up good?
Blown up bad. They had to redo it.
Wow.
They had a whole nother cycle with the old districts, which benefited Democrats.
You're talking about the state districts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they blew it up. I would not say they blew it up. I mean, how bad were they before? But then they went back the second time. Yeah. Now the congressional districts, the
That
last time they were
challenge doesn't go to
challenged,
the state Supreme Court.
no,
It goes
that,
to the feds.
that goes to the feds, and that was challenged back
I feel like
in 2004.
I feel like we're over the 2 seconds.
Yes.
Well, we
I'm
are.
sorry, Dennis.
And I thank you both for being here. I
guys are
appreciate it.
great.
There's still more to talk about, and maybe in our next topic we'll get a word from Kendra.
I learned a lot.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to talk about towing, and Amanda, take it from there.
Yes, so actually, Kendra, this started more
Over
than
a
a
year
year
ago,
ago.
yeah.
This is a story we both have been working on for a long time. It started, Kendra, when you got a call from a young man named Gus. I don't know if you want to start us
Yeah,
off.
it was about a year ago. He called and said that he felt like he was forced to have his car towed after being in an accident in Camp Hill. So we interviewed him initially and filed some right to know requests and got the ball rolling. And as Amanda and I are talking in the office, she's like, I have some sources that are telling me this might be happening somewhere else. And then that's how West Shore got brought in, and it went from there.
So basically, we learned that in Camp Hill, for Camp Hill Police and West Shore Regional Police Department, both had directives. In West Shore, we actually got the written directive, but in both cases, police officers were directed to call one towing company whenever there's a crash, and that company is G.A. Smith. Our sources told us that this started when a mechanic that both police chiefs knew, Chief Michael Hope with West Shore Regional and Chief Doug Hockenberry with Camp Hill, that a mechanic they both knew started working at G.A. Smith, and that's when those directives went out. As we started doing the research and looking at the law, that's when we said, maybe there's something more here. I know, Kendra, when you initially filed your right to know request, Camp Hill's chief, Doug Hockenberry, called you in a, shall we call it an agitated state?
Yeah, I mean, he did call me and ask what we were looking for, and technically they cannot ask that.
Well, they can. You don't have to tell them
You
why
don't
you're
have to tell them
requesting.
why you're looking for the information. They can ask you questions about what exactly you're looking for,
Right, to help them find the records.
Right. So right out of the gate, we thought they're being a little defensive already. So we were anticipating what the records would show. So they originally tried to deny the records, and I was like, Amanda, help. She loves the right to know
right
stuff.
to know
So
request.
she appealed it.
Yes, so we filed right to know requests with Camp Hill and West Shore Regional Police for various towing records, including but not limited to which towing company was called for each crash over the span of the years this has been going on and what it looked like before these directives
How
rolled
many
out.
crashes a year roughly does a municipality deal with? Do we know?
Well, so it depends. So over a 5-year span in West Shore Regional Jurisdiction, which covers Lemoyne and Wormleysburg, there were roughly 230 crashes.
in 5 years.
In 5 years. And it depends on the size. It depends on sometimes how bad the winter is that year. But that's kind of a rough idea. Both departments denied our various right to know requests. We appealed to the Office of Open Records. The Office of Open Records said the records showing which towing company was called for which crash, you got to turn it over. Camp Hill still insists they don't have any such records, and other police chiefs I've talked to have kind of raised an eyebrow at that. But Camp Hill also, we had requested emails about towing from them. And what they did not know when I requested that email was that I had some of those emails about towing. So when they came back and told me we don't have any emails about towing, raised an eyebrow at that and challenged that decision. And so that's why...
we knew that they existed.
Correct.
Yeah.
We knew they existed. So there was a lot of back and forth over there. West Shore ended up turning over the records. Camp Hill appealed the Office of Open Records decision in court. And so that's been a much more lengthy back and forth. That's still going on.
So you have a taxpayer-funded
yes,
group of people
roughly,
in Camp Hill not wanting to turn over what you suspect they have,
and at
which
this
they could
point,
do
it's a
for
little
free,
more than $4,000.
and they're paying lawyers to continue to block.
Right, about a month's worth of Camp Hill's typical legal fees have gone into fighting this right to know request decision. Putting that aside, though, as we started talking to other police departments and other police chiefs, we noticed that so many of them were using multiple vendors. So 11 out of 11 different
lots of other
departments.
municipalities use multiple
And
towing
on a
companies.
rotation. Many police officers we talk to say that's how they
Correct.
do it.
A rotation.
Yes. So Pennsylvania towing law says that in consultation with law enforcement, and you know that's a nice little vague phrase there, in consultation with law enforcement, for the most part, you should be able to choose which company tows you and where you are to be towed. Police can override your choice of a towing company if you are impeding traffic, you're a hazard, you're parked illegally, and your towing company of choice cannot arrive in a timely fashion. So what's interesting is, and I have more than 30 messages from people in email and on my phone who are telling very similar stories where they've been told right away, you can't even call this other place. I have AAA, I want to get towed. And they're being told in these municipalities, no, you have to use our towing service, is the way in many cases it's
And
being
this is
phrased.
what the police officer is telling the motorists.
Yes. And so if all of that happened and people got a deal out of it at the end of the day, I don't think they would mind.
Right. These bills were significant.
But what's happening is, and towing bills can bring sticker shock. If your car's flipped over, it's going to cost more to be towed. Police incident towing in general tends to be more expensive than if you have a breakdown on the side of the road. But what was happening and what we've been hearing from people and what Gus's story is he wanted his car towed to his house. He actually wanted to drive home. He said he could have driven home because he lived half
Right
a mile
around,
up the street, not even that far. And he was told, no, your car needs to be towed. And so he's questioning even whether that needed to happen at all.
And then it wasn't towed to his house?
And it was not towed to his house. It was towed to G.A. Smith, and then he had a hard time getting it back. So he says G.A. Smith told him, we can't give you your car back until we get a police report.
But oh, by the way, the meter's running on the impound where the car sits.
Correct. And in that meantime, we're going to charge you storage fees. That's really interesting because the police chiefs that I've spoken to say, unless there's a criminal investigation or we specifically put a hold on the car if someone died, there's no reason a towing company should need to wait for a police report to
Or even-
release your car.
I was an offender bender, and they towed my car right to my house.
Right. And so Pennsylvania law, and we have a link to that on our website, goes into, when they're allowed to charge you for storage fees. But I've gotten a lot of calls from people who are law enforcement and former law enforcement saying, look, this towing law doesn't protect consumers nearly as much as it should anyway. Yeah. The point being, people were mad that they feel like they're getting these higher bills. They say they've complained about it to both police departments, and they haven't really gotten anywhere. So as we fought for these records, we crunched the numbers, mapped out every crash that happened, where it happened, which towing company was called. For West Shore, at least, because we had those records showing which towing company was called for each crash, we saw quite literally an overnight shift. So in 2010 and 2011, G.A. Smith towed 3.4% of crashes. In the 5 years after, which was when that directive came out that we're going to use G.A. Smith, which, by the way, was the same time that Camp Hill officers were told they had to start calling G.A. Smith, for West Shore, they got 97% of the tows.
Wow.
And so we spoke with a different police chief on camera, John Snyder, Newberry Township, who said he does a strict rotation in that if your choice of a towing company can't respond in a timely manner and you're impeding traffic, he has a list of several, I believe it's 6 different towing companies that he will call, and he will just go through the rotation. He says that's the only fair way to do it. You have to stick to it in a very strict manner, because otherwise you let one place get too comfortable. And when you, as the police, are calling a vendor, you're kind of taking responsibility for that. People assume
it a little bit.
you vetted that, so now it's you're taking on some responsibility to your department.
And if somebody complains about the service they got at a towing company to that chief, how does he respond?
He says he goes over to the towing company and say, hey, what's up? He's taken people off his rotation list before. He's taken towing companies off because people have had problems with them. And they know that he doesn't have a problem taking them off the list. And so he said usually those issues are resolved relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. So that's his take on it. He says he can't speak for any other department, but that's what he does, and he believes this is really the only fair way to do it. He did say that, in some places, the council members really want you to keep the business in the municipality. Yep. So if you're in Lemoyne, they want to make sure it's going to Lemoyne business.
And I can understand that
too,
completely.
Yeah.
But some other police chiefs have told me they're really uncomfortable with that, because let's say you only have one place and the guy who runs the towing company has a criminal background.
Well, that's
what do you
one
do?
thing. I mean, to me, it was more of they're probably closer if they're within
Correct.
the borough or wherever the crash happened.
But they
all
said
things
as
being equal, you'd rather give the business to somebody who's in the borough,
You
paying
would.
taxes in the borough.
They told me that they don't think it's police
GA
job
Smith
is to
located, by the way?
protect. It's in Lemoyne.
It's in Lemoyne.
But it's not the only towing company in Lemoyne. Okay. So the police chiefs I've spoken to who say they're uncomfortable with just keeping it in the municipality, they say, we don't think it's our job to pick winners and losers for business, because depending on where it happens in the municipality, you might be on the line of somewhere else that's a lot closer, and we don't want to create a situation in which someone gets too comfortable and, oh, by the way, if we're doing this at council's direction and they're trying to get reelected with the support of small businesses, now I'm playing a role in some political maneuvering, and I don't know how much I like that either.
What's Camp Hill and West Shore's response?
So we spent the better part of October trying to get Camp Hill and West Shore's response. Same with GA Smith. No one called us back. And after the story ran, Camp Hill Borough, not specifically the police department, the borough, published a statement on their Facebook page.
A statement on their Facebook page, but would not respond to several requests from the station.
So, and we have that posted. I'll let you read it. I'm not going to get in like a line by line argument
Rebuttal.
over it.
Right.
No, because there are some things in there that our reporting shows to be false, but I think you can judge for yourself seeing the documentation we have in our reporting versus what they say in their statement. But people are mad about this. The last few days coming to work, my inbox has been full. I've seen people saying we are going to go to our council meetings and we're going to talk to people about this, because they don't like the feeling that because of a personal relationship with the business, that police departments are favoring one place and they feel as though it is coming at their expense.
Yeah, there's ethics questions there, and I think the other big thing to take away from this is knowing what your rights are if this ever happens to you.
Exactly.
You do have a choice, and nobody, except for the few exceptions you mentioned, you do have the ability to choose.
What struck me is the one fella had moved his car off to the side of
Yes.
the road, a side street, side road. At that point, I can do I should be able to do what I want to do. Police shouldn't have anything to say about
Camp Hill Borough, in their statement, maintains that his car was in a busy intersection blocking traffic. But if you look at photos of the aftermath of that crash, it is clear that his car was not there. That's where the crash happened.
Yes.
But then he
parked
was
on a
able
side
to
street.
move it.
Yeah.
And there are sources and documentation that back up the location of his car. And his isn't the only story like this. Lots of different people telling very, very similar things. We did get about 2 hours before we went to air, someone identifying himself as an attorney for GA Smith sent us a letter saying that they understand that we were attempting to develop a story involving their client. And they said that it involves numerous and harassing right-to-know requests being served upon local municipalities, and that this has caused significant and unnecessary expenses to be incurred by taxpayers, and that my actions have caused harm to the business of G.A. Smith. So we got this before we aired a story, which I found interesting. But I also found interesting the reference to right-to-know requests, because my question is, how does G.A. Smith know about right-to-know requests
and
I'm
what's their
filing
role in that?
with Camp Hill and West Shore Regional Police? The only way they would really know about this, and
if the
actually
police chief told them.
the only way they would know to copy the attorney they copied on that email would be by conferring with Camp Hill as far as copying the attorney, and then with the right-to-know request, West Shore Regional Police or Camp Hill Police.
Unless they filed a right-to-know request for any right-to-know request that we filed.
In which case, how would they know to even do that?
Right.
And so if police are conferring with G.A. Smith in that sense, how confident can I be that when you're denying my right-to-know request, you're doing it in good faith, in that you truly believe these records are not public or they truly don't exist, as opposed to out of self-interest? I think those are some
I'm guessing
questions
you're not
to
very
be
confident
raised.
in that.
Well, look, I think good, honest people can have a good, honest debate about what should be and what should not be a public record.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we request records and they don't exist. But I was born in the morning. I wasn't born yesterday morning, as my father-in-law likes to say. And when I have an email with the exact keywords that I asked for,
and they're claiming they don't have
and
it.
you're claiming that you didn't find any records because you don't know I have that email, that is a red flag to me.
That's a broader question, too. What is the teeth exactly of you asking for something that you know any municipality has, and they say, we don't have it, we're not giving
All
it to you?
they have to do is make a sworn statement that they don't have it. They sign an affidavit, and that is considered
Did anybody
proof
do that? Did we
that
go
they.
to that
Yep,
level?
yep.
But you had it
the
in your
initial
hand.
for the towing records. The reason we won that appeal, not to get too far in the weeds, was that the Office of Open Records said, you have not demonstrated enough proof that you guys don't have this record, and that's what they appealed in court. And maybe they don't have that record. If they don't, I think there are some people who live in Camp Hill who would like them to start keeping that because they seem really interested in that. But at the end of the day, if someone is complaining about someone, first of all, a reporter doing their job, filing right-to-know requests, I don't know how much that errs on the side of transparency. But these are the people's records. These are the public records. Local government is the custodian of those records. So it is part of your job to go through these requests and to turn over the documents. And it's not supposed to matter who's requesting it. And it's not supposed to matter what that content is if it is truly a public record. So I think the next few weeks are going to be very interesting, to say the least. It is worth noting that Camp Hill's police chief, who you may recognize the name, Doug Hockenberry, because he was recently charged with DUI. This happened actually a week after I had given him the deadline to respond for our story. But court paperwork shows that he called G.A. Smith to tow his car from the scene.
From Perry County.
From Perry County. Which is not close. And he called them but did not call police. So state police tell me if G.A. Smith had succeeded in towing his car before police got there, this case could have been considered a hit and run because there was property damage. And they are confident that Chief Hockenberry, in his capacity as a police chief, would have some inkling that that would be the case. All right. Word from you is really quick this week. We just had one email from Julie, who said, I loved hearing the story about Travis Quirin and his kickboxing for compassion. With everything being so negatively reported lately, it's great to hear a story of hope, survival, and turning it into something positive.
Really quickly, I went with my family. We were there when he was about 40 rounds to about 56 rounds, and he did it. He actually went 114 rounds.
And for people who may have missed that episode...
He was unfortunately the victim of sexual assault when he was a child. He has turned that now into trying to help others. The anger and hurt that he felt, he challenges himself to physical goals, competitions, things like that. He was trying to set a Guinness Book book of world records to go 112 straight rounds of kickboxing, and I believe he raised over $5,000, and that will go to the Carlisle YWCA. But we stopped by. When we were there, his wife got in the ring with him.
Yes, that was fascinating to me. He allowed his wife to punch him in the face, he says.
And another really cool thing, and I won't remember his name, but there was actually a mixed martial arts, an MMA fighter that Travis wrote a letter to. He lived out in Hawaii and said, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. He actually flew in from Hawaii to do 30 rounds with him. And it was really neat to watch. My kids thought it was pretty neat. So congratulations to him for making it all the way.
Well, that wraps this one up on a very good note, positive note. Thank you both. If you'd like to check out the links to the stories, articles, and videos we discussed, you can find them in our show notes on our website, abc27.com. To get On Deadline delivered directly to your phone, tablet, or computer each week, subscribe in iTunes or Google Play Music. Please take a few minutes and leave us a review in iTunes. We do read them, and your thoughts help us figure out what we're doing well and what we can improve upon. If you have any news tips for the ABC27 Investigators or any questions, topics you'd like us to discuss during our weekly podcast, send us a message on the ABC27 Investigators Facebook page. We'd like to thank Eric Semmel for producing this podcast, Jason Dietz for composing and recording the music. But it's time for us to go. We're on deadline.